His dog would not leave the fireplace. Gunner stood rigid before the old stone hearth, ears pinned forward, every muscle locked tight beneath his dark coat. He did not bark. He did not whine. He simply stood there, nose aimed at the wall of river rock as though something lived behind it. Something breathing. Something waiting. But it was not fear. Rowan Mercer knew fear in a dog. He had seen it in the alleyways of Kandahar in the moments before the world cracked open with noise and fire. This was not that. This was urgency. The same urgency Gunner showed every time Rowan was about to fall apart. Every time the edges of reality started bending and the dog would press against him and breathe slow until Rowan remembered where he was. Something was hidden behind that stone. Something that had been waiting 15 years for someone brave enough to answer it. But this story does not begin at a fireplace. It begins 48 hours earlier in a courthouse on the worst morning of Rowan Mercer's life. Tell us where you are watching from today. Like and subscribe so you do not miss what Gunner finds behind that wall. The fluorescent lights in the Bozeman County Courthouse hummed with a dull, steady buzz. The kind that seeped into a man's bones if he sat still long enough. Former Navy SEAL Rowan Mercer sat rigid in the third row, shoulders squared out of habit, jaw set with the discipline of a man who had survived things most people only read about in history books. He was 52 years old. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples. A scar ran thin and pale along his left jawline, barely visible unless the light caught it just right. His left knee throbbed with a deep, grinding ache that never fully went away. It had been rebuilt twice, once in a military hospital in Germany, once in a VA clinic in Colorado. Neither surgery gave him back what he lost. He shifted his weight to the right, the way he always did. Now a small adjustment that had become as automatic as breathing. He looked like a man carved from quiet endurance, the kind of man who stood at the back of a room, scanned every exit, and never sat with his back to a door. The courtroom smelled of old wood and floor polish and the faint staleness of institutional heating. A clerk shuffled papers behind the bench. Two attorneys in dark suits whispered near the window. Outside, snow fell thick and silent against the tall glass panes of the courthouse, turning the Montana morning into a wall of white. The judge cleared his throat. According to the validated will of Marjorie Mercer, all property and financial assets shall be transferred to the following beneficiaries. Rowan kept his eyes forward. He expected little. Maybe a photograph. Maybe his mother's ring. Something small that said she had remembered him at the end, even if she had spent the last 20 years pretending he did not exist. To Garrett Hollis, the Calvert Ranch and all associated land holdings near Livingston. To Celeste Hollis, the investment portfolios and financial instruments held with Pacific Northwest Trust. Garrett Hollis adjusted his tie from across the aisle. He was 46, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from inheriting things rather than earning them. His sister Celeste sat beside him, her blonde hair pulled tight, a diamond bracelet catching the courtroom light in small, sharp flashes. They were Rowan's cousins, his mother's sister's children. They had grown up in the same valley, but never in the same world. And to her son, Rowan Mercer. The judge paused. Rowan felt his chest tighten. There is no designated inheritance. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. No ripple, no sound. Just weight, sinking down through the silence of the courtroom until it settled somewhere deep in Rowan's gut. No explanation, no kind words. Not even a memory mentioned in her final documents. He stared at the grain of the wooden bench in front of him. His knuckles went pale where they gripped the edge of his seat. He had faced gunfire. He had pulled wounded men through burning rubble. He had sat in darkness for 72 hours during a reconnaissance mission without moving, without sleeping, without making a single sound. But this was a different kind of wound, the kind that opened in the quiet part of a man's heart, where he still kept the voice of his mother calling him inside for supper. From across the aisle, Garrett leaned forward just enough for his voice to carry. Guess walking away from the family was not the smartest move, after all. Should have stuck around instead of running off to play soldier. Celeste covered her mouth with her hand, but the smile underneath was unmistakable. Rowan did not look at them. He stood slowly. The legs of his chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sharp sound that cut through the murmurs around him. He buttoned his coat. His left knee screamed as he straightened it, and he breathed through the pain the way he always did, with his teeth clenched and his eyes steady, and his face showing nothing. He walked toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. Each step was measured. Each breath was controlled. Behind him, Garrett's low laughter drifted through the chamber like smoke. The corridor was cold, clean, quiet in ways people rarely were. Gunner was waiting. The German shepherd lifted his head the moment Rowan pushed through the doors. His ears came forward. His amber eyes locked onto Rowan's face with an intensity that held no judgment, no agenda. Only recognition. Only loyalty. Only the simple, wordless understanding that passes between two beings who have kept each other alive. Gunner was 7 years old. 85 pounds of trained discipline wrapped in black and tan fur. He had served 3 tours as a military working dog before a shrapnel wound retired him. The scar on his right shoulder was hidden beneath his coat, but Rowan knew exactly where it was. He had been the one pressing gauze against it in the back of a helicopter while the desert burned below. Gunner rose from his spot near the wall and pressed his body against Rowan's leg. Not pushing, not pulling. Just being there. A warm, solid weight against the part of Rowan that was threatening to buckle. Rowan knelt. His left knee cracked and he inhaled sharply through his nose, but he knelt anyway. He buried his hand in the thick fur behind Gunner's ears and held it there. The dog's breathing was slow, steady, like a metronome set to the rhythm of survival. Just you and me, boy. Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. That is all we have got. Gunner nudged Rowan's palm with his nose. Once. Soft, but certain. Behind them, the courtroom door swung open again. Garrett's laughter spilled into the hallway, sharp and pleased. Rowan did not turn around. He just stood squared his shoulders and let out a long breath that clouded faintly in the cold air of the corridor. He gave Gunner one more gentle pat on the head. Let us go. We are done here. They walked toward the exit together, 2 silhouettes cutting through the winter light of the courthouse lobby. A man and his dog, carrying the quiet grief of a family that had just shown exactly what it was. The courthouse steps were slick with fresh snow. Rowan paused beneath the awning and closed his eyes. The cold stung his lungs. Gunner leaned into his leg, grounding him in the way only the dog could. A woman's voice called from behind. "Mr. Mercer." He turned. A woman in her late 50s approached heels, tapping cautiously on the wet concrete. She wore a wool coat the color of charcoal and clutched a leather briefcase against her side. Her hair streaked with silver framed a face that was steady and purposeful. Rowan Mercer. She was slightly breathless. "I am Catherine Yates, attorney. I need a word with you." Rowan stepped half in front of Gunner on instinct. "If this is about the hearing, I am not interested." "It is not." She opened her briefcase with careful hands and pulled out an envelope. It was sealed with deep red wax. His name was handwritten across the front in elegant slanting script. "This was entrusted to me by Vivian Whitmore." She paused. "Your grandmother's older sister." The name hit Rowan like a scent carried on winter wind. Distant, half forgotten, but real. Vivian Whitmore. "I met her once. I was maybe 7. "Yes." Catherine nodded. "And she left the family decades ago. But before she passed, she left very specific instructions. This letter was to be delivered to you, and only you, after the reading of your mother's will." Rowan stared at the envelope. Why Catherine looked at him with something close to sorrow. Because she knew what was going to happen today. The wind picked up, pushing snow across the courthouse steps in low, swirling sheets. Gunner sniffed the envelope once, then sat, ears forward, almost expectant, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Rowan broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, filled with tight, graceful handwriting. "My dear Rowan, if you are holding this, then the cycle has repeated. Our family has always been quick to judge, quick to cast out those who do not fit their image. They did it to me long before they did it to you." He swallowed. His throat felt like it was closing. "But I have watched you from afar. Your service, your sacrifice, your loyalty, especially to that remarkable dog of yours. You deserved far more than what you received today. This is why I am leaving you something I once built from nothing. My estate at North Timber Ridge. The land, the house, and all that rests within it now belong to you." Gunner nudged Rowan's elbow. Rowan read the next line and felt the ground shift beneath his boots. "Trust Gunner. He will show you the way." A skeleton key was tucked behind the letter. Old brass, heavy, with a tiny pine tree etched into its bow. "Is this real?" Rowan asked quietly. Catherine's eyes did not waver. 480 acres in the Timber Ridge Mountains. A mansion that has been untouched for over a decade. "It is very real, Mr. Mercer." He turned the key over in his palm. The brass was cold, solid. The first thing that had felt solid all day. From the corner of his eye, Rowan caught movement near the parking lot. Garrett stood beside his black SUV watching. He had seen the envelope. He had seen Catherine. Even from 50 feet away, Rowan could see the way Garrett's jaw tightened. Garrett pulled out his phone and made a call. He did not take his eyes off Rowan while he spoke. Catherine touched Rowan's arm gently. "You should leave soon. There is a storm coming tonight. The worst in 50 years, they are saying." Rowan looked toward the northern horizon. Heavy clouds gathered like a dark wall pressing low against the mountains. "Then we better move." He looked down at Gunner. "What do you think, boy, ready for a drive?" Gunner barked once. Sharp, certain. The sound echoed off the courthouse walls and faded into the falling snow. They climbed into the truck. Rowan rested his hands on the wheel and sat still for a moment. In the rearview mirror, Garrett was still watching, still talking on his phone. Rowan turned the key in the ignition. "Let us find out what you left us, Vivian." Gunner settled beside him, eyes bright. Together, they pulled out of Bozeman and drove north into the gathering storm. The sky turned the color of bruised iron before they reached the highway. Thick clouds pressed low over the mountains, swallowing the peaks that rose like ancient sentinels above the valley. Traffic thinned until Rowan felt as though he and Gunner were the last two souls moving through a world that was slowly emptying. The first flakes fell just past Chateau, big lazy spirals that drifted across the windshield. Rowan turned the wipers on and tightened his grip. He had driven in storms before, in the Humvees that rattled through Afghan mountain passes, in the convoys that crawled through sandstorms so thick the world narrowed to the hood of the vehicle. But tonight felt different. The air held a sharp electric edge, the kind of tension he used to feel in the seconds before a flashbang. Gunner sensed it too. He sat upright, ears forward, watching the road with the focus of a soldier scanning for threats. "Stay close, buddy," Rowan murmured. "Might be a rough one." As they climbed higher, visibility collapsed. The wind hurled snow in violent gusts that shook the truck. White swallowed everything. Road lines, trees, the faint glow of distant ranches. The world shrank to the 10 feet ahead of the headlights. A blast of wind slammed the side of the truck and the tires skidded. And then it happened. The sound of tires losing grip on ice merged with something else in Rowan's mind. A roar that was not wind. A shaking that was not the truck. Sand instead of snow. Heat instead of cold. He was back. Kandahar, the convoy shuddering under incoming fire. The radio screaming coordinates he could not hear over the blast. Men shouting his name. Dust so thick he could taste it at the back of his throat. And somewhere in the chaos, the sound of Gunner barking the younger Gunner, barking through the smoke, dragging a wounded handler by the vest strap. Rowan's hands locked on the steering wheel. His eyes were open, but he was not seeing the road. He was not seeing Montana. He was seeing the place that lived behind his eyelids every night, the place that waited for any crack in his armor to come rushing back. The truck drifted toward the shoulder, toward the drop-off. Gunner did not bark. He never barked during these moments. Instead, the dog leaned his full weight into Rowan's right arm. He pressed his head against Rowan's thigh, and he breathed. Slow, deep, in and out, in and out. A rhythm older than language, older than war. Rowan's left hand released the wheel slightly. His right hand found Gunner's fur. He gripped it, held on, let the steady rise and fall of the dog's ribcage become the only thing that mattered. The sand faded. The shouting dimmed. The snow came back. The road came back. "I am here," Rowan whispered through clenched teeth. "I am here." He corrected the wheel. The truck steadied. The tires found pavement again. His heart hammered. His hands trembled. But the road was straight and the dog was warm and the worst had passed. "Good boy." His voice cracked. "Good boy." Gunner pressed closer. His tail gave one slow wag. Not celebratory, just present. An hour later, through the blinding white, something dark materialized. First a shape, then a silhouette. Then the unmistakable outline of a gate leaning crooked against a stone wall. A wooden sign half buried in snow read, "Whitmore Estate, Private Road." They crept up the mountain road, the truck fighting through drifts that rose to the bumper. Twice Rowan had to back up and find a new angle. The wind screamed. The wipers fought a losing battle. Then the storm parted just enough to reveal it. The mansion rose from the darkness like something carved from a different century. 3 stories of weathered stone. Snow clung to the steep roof lines and covered the wraparound balconies. Towering pines bowed under ice on every side, standing like sentries at attention. It did not radiate warmth. It radiated presence, history, weight. Gunner sat perfectly still, staring at the mansion through the windshield. His ears were forward. His body was calm, as if he recognized the place. Rowan killed the engine. The silence that followed was immense. Only the wind clawing at the truck. Only the snow swirling against glass. We made it. He rested his hand on Gunner's back. Somehow we made it. They stepped out into knee-deep snow. The cold bit through Rowan's jacket instantly. His left knee nearly buckled on the uneven ground, but he caught himself against the truck door and kept moving. Gunner leaped out with the precision of a trained partner, landing clean, scanning every direction before falling into step beside Rowan. Together, they trudged to the front entrance. Rowan pulled out the brass key. It fit the massive oak door with a heavy, satisfying click. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of stale, frozen air. They stood at the threshold. Darkness ahead. Storm behind. Let us see what she left us, boy. They stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a thud that echoed through the vast entry hall. The air was cold enough to sting. It carried the faint smell of dust and aged wood and something deeper, like winters trapped in stone. Rowan clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and found a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. Faded chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, their crystal drops coated with decades of frost. White sheets draped over furniture like pale ghosts standing watch. Gunner moved ahead, nose low, tail stiff. His ears twitched in every direction, processing sounds Rowan could not hear. Easy, boy. They moved deeper. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor, each sound amplified in the cavernous space. Then Gunner stopped, not gradually, not casually. He stopped the way a military dog stops when something is wrong. Body rigid, head low, every muscle tensed. Rowan swung the flashlight toward the back of the hall. The beam caught the edge of a doorway leading to the kitchen. The fireplace in the kitchen was warm, not blazing, not crackling, but warm. Someone had fed it a log within the last few hours. Embers still glowed beneath a thin layer of ash. Rowan's training took over. He swept the room, clear, swept the pantry, clear, moved to the back door. It was unlocked, and on the stone steps outside, brushed with fresh snow, a figure sat huddled in the cold. A woman, small, older. Her coat was too thin for the weather. She clutched a wooden box to her chest with both hands, holding it the way a person holds the last thing that matters. Her white hair was gathered loosely. Her face was lined with the kind of weariness that does not come from one bad night, but from years of carrying something alone. Gunner moved before Rowan could react. The dog walked past Rowan through the open doorway and sat down beside the woman on the cold stone steps. He lowered his head, pressed his shoulder gently against her arm, and waited. The woman startled, then looked down at the dog. Her eyes filled. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the top of Gunner's head. Her fingers moved slowly through his fur, as if she were remembering something from a very long time ago. It has been so long since I touched a dog. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The last one I had. Vivian and I raised him together. Rowan stood in the doorway. The cold wind pushed past him into the kitchen, but he did not move. Who are you? The woman looked up. Her eyes were red but steady. "My name is May Pruitt. I live down the mountain. I was Vivian's only friend for 30 years. She paused. "I have been coming here every week since she passed, to sit with her, so she would not be alone." Rowan felt something shift in his chest. Not pain exactly. Something quieter. Something that pressed against the walls he had built around everything soft. May looked at Gunner, still leaning against her. "She said someone would come." I did not believe her. She lifted the wooden box from her lap and held it toward Rowan. Inside was a folded silk handkerchief embroidered with the initials VW, and beneath it a small leather notebook. Its cover was worn smooth from handling. She wrote in this every day the last year of her life. May's voice broke slightly. "She told me to give it to whoever came for the house. I never opened it. I was afraid of what it would say." Rowan took the notebook. It was light in his hands, but it carried a weight he could feel in his bones. He opened the cover. The first page held a single line in Vivian's graceful handwriting. "You are worthy of everything they told you that you were not." Rowan stared at those words. He read them again. A third time. His jaw tightened. His eyes burned. But he did not cry. He stood very still for a long time, the snow falling around him, and the dog sitting at the old woman's feet, and the wind howling across the mountain, and for the first time in more years than he could count, someone who shared his blood had said something kind to him. May watched his face. She did not speak. She did not need to. She had seen that same expression on Vivian's face 100 times. The look of someone who had been starving for so long, they forgot they were hungry until someone finally set bread on the table. May told him more while the fire died slowly. She told him how Vivian had come to Timber Ridge alone in the winter of 1998. How she had arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dog named Captain, and the fierce, quiet determination of a woman who had been stripped of everything and decided to rebuild from the ground up. How she had bought the estate with money she earned herself investment by careful investment, year after patient year. How she had restored the mansion room by room, planting gardens in the spring and reading through the long winters, and never once asking anyone for anything. She was the strongest person I ever knew. May's voice was steady, but thin like thread, holding something heavy. And the loneliest. Rowan listened without interrupting. He recognized the way May spoke about Vivian. It was the way soldiers spoke about the men they had served beside, with reverence and the particular ache of someone who wished they had said more while there was still time. May told him about the man who had come to the estate a few months before Vivian died. A younger man in an expensive car. Vivian had met him at the door, and May had watched from the kitchen window. She could not hear the words, but she could see Vivian's face, the way her hands trembled, the way she stepped backward, then straightened herself and pointed toward the road. She was afraid, May said quietly. I had never seen her afraid before, not of storms, not of sickness, not of dying. But she was afraid of that man. Rowan understood then. Garrett had found Vivian before she died. He had come for the estate while she was still breathing, and she had turned him away. And she had known, with the certainty of a woman who understood her family's hunger, that he would come back. The notebook became more than memories after that. Rowan read it through the night, sitting in the frozen kitchen with Gunner at his feet and May across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of instant coffee heated over the last embers. The smell of old pine smoke and dust and bitter coffee filled the room like a kind of communion. Vivian had filled the pages with plans, architectural sketches drawn with careful measured lines, budget calculations, letters to contractors who never received them, notes in the margins about materials and timelines and local zoning codes. All of it orbiting a single idea she called the Legacy Project, a veterans' sanctuary, a place where men and women who had served could come to find warmth and quiet and the slow, patient work of putting themselves back together. She had designed therapy rooms with large windows facing the mountains, a communal kitchen where people could sit together and not have to eat alone, a library holding the thousands of books she had collected over decades, walking trails through the pines where dogs could run free and their owners could breathe. She had thought of everything, down to the width of doorways for wheelchair access, down to sound insulation in the walls so that nightmares would not wake the person in the next room. Everything was drawn with precision and tenderness, the way a person designs something they love desperately but know they may never live to see finished. The last entry was dated 11 days before her death. The handwriting was shakier, less controlled, but the words were clear. If someone finds this, please do not let it die here. I built the foundation. I simply ran out of time. Rowan closed the notebook. He pressed his palm flat against the cover and held it there as if he could feel Vivian's hand on the other side of the years. May had fallen asleep in the chair, the mug still in her hands. Gunner's tail rested against her ankle. Even in sleep, the dog kept contact, kept watch. Rowan rose carefully, his left knee grinding as he straightened and let Gunner lead him deeper into the house. The dog moved with certainty. Up the grand staircase, nails clicking softly on the mahogany steps. Past the second-floor landing where faded portraits lined the walls. Faces Rowan did not recognize. Lives that had filled these rooms and left only dust. Gunner paused at the master bedroom door, sniffed the air once, and pushed through. There, Gunner pawed at a massive antique mirror against the wall. The glass was clouded but intact, framed in dark wood, carved with mountain peaks and pine branches. Gunner shoved his shoulder into the frame. A metallic clunk answered from somewhere behind the glass. Rowan crouched, wincing as his knee folded. A gap ran along the left edge of the mirror. When he pressed his palm against the frame, the whole thing shifted. Behind it, a concealed panel. He braced himself and pushed. The mirror swung open on hidden hinges with a gritty scrape of rust and time. A narrow staircase spiraled upward into pure darkness. The air that drifted down from above was colder than the rest of the mansion. Older. It smelled like turpentine and canvas and something sweet that might have been dried lavender. Gunner took the first step without hesitation. Rowan followed each stair, groaning beneath their weight as if the house was waking from a long sleep. At the top, a wooden door opened into a room bathed in faint blue light from skylights above. Snow had piled on the glass panes, filtering the pre-dawn glow into something almost otherworldly. An art studio. Easels stood in every corner like silent witnesses. Paintings covered every wall. Brushes and palettes lay on a long work table beside jars of hardened pigment and ceramic cups filled with stiffened brushes. The room smelled of linseed oil and cold dust and the faintest ghost of perfume. It felt like a chapel, a private sacred space where Vivian had poured everything she could not say into color and canvas. But it was the painting on the largest easel that stopped Rowan cold. A man in uniform, broad shoulders, straight spine, the posture of someone trained to stand at attention even when no one was watching. Standing beside a German shepherd with the exact markings of Gunner, the dark saddleback, the tan legs, even the small swirl of darker fur between the shoulders that Rowan touched every night before falling asleep. The painting was dated 20 years ago. Rowan stared. His breathing changed without him noticing. Gunner pressed his nose to the bottom of the canvas and let out a soft, bewildered whimper. "How could she have painted this?" Rowan whispered. "You were not even born 20 years ago." Numbers were carved into the wooden frame. 1943-7702. Rowan turned them over in his mind, matching them to dates from Vivian's journal. 1943, the year the house was built. 1977, the year the family cast her out. 1902, her husband's birth year. 2019, the year she began preparing for whoever would come after her. Behind the studio, past a cracked stool and a stack of blank canvases, Gunner found another hidden door. This one was reinforced steel painted green, but dulled by decades of neglect. A combination lock sat at its center with 4 notches that matched exactly the 4 numbers on the frame. Rowan wiped dust from the dial and entered the sequence. Each number clicked into place with a deep, resonant weight that vibrated through the floor. Then a metallic thunk echoed through the chamber like a lock being thrown on a bank vault in an old film. He pulled the lever. The door resisted, then gave way with a screech of metal that sent dust cascading from the frame. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered to life automatically. The hum filled the chamber like a held breath finally released. Rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled by decade. Glass display cases stood in the center, their contents catching the light. Gold coins, jewelry, certificates from companies whose names Rowan recognized immediately. Stacks of bearer bonds wrapped in cotton. Wooden drawers holding documents that represented lifetimes of quiet, disciplined accumulation. A leather binder on a pedestal at the center held the inventory in Vivian's handwriting. Total assets, $265 million. Rowan staggered back one step. The flashlight slipped in his grip. Its beam quivered across the vault shelves like a searchlight losing its bearing. 265 million. He said it aloud, and the words sounded foreign, like a language he had never been taught. Gunner nudged his hand. Rowan rested his palm on the dog's head and let the warmth of it steady him. He turned another page. The section was labeled Legacy Project for My True Heir. Below the heading, a single sentence. If you are reading this, then everything I built is now in your hands. Protect it wisely, Rowan. She had known his name. She had watched him. She had chosen him quietly, deliberately, from the other side of a family that had thrown them both away. Rowan noticed something else inside the vault. Near the entrance, partially hidden behind a filing cabinet, the housing of a security camera had been torn from the wall. Wires dangled where it had been ripped free, and on the steel frame of the vault door itself near the combination lock, there were scratches, deep ones, made by tools, not time. Someone had tried to force this door open before Rowan ever arrived. He ran his fingers over the gouges. They were not fresh, but they were not decades old either, recent enough to raise the hair on the back of his neck. He photographed them with his phone. Every scratch, every torn wire, every mark that said someone else had stood here before him, wanting what was behind this door. Rowan climbed back up to the kitchen as dawn began to press its pale gray light through the frost-covered windows. May was awake, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the grand hall, looking at the way the early light fell across the dusty floor and made the chandeliers sparkle faintly, as if the house itself was remembering what it felt like to be seen. He told her what he found. Not the money, not the vault. He told her about the legacy project, about the sanctuary Vivian dreamed of and designed down to every door frame and walking trail, about the pages and pages of plans that waited for someone to pick up where she left off. May was quiet for a long time. She held the silk handkerchief from her wooden box, running her thumb across Vivian's embroidered initials. Then she spoke, and her voice was the steadiest it had been all night. If you do this, you will not just be opening a house. You will be pulling this whole town out of a long, deep sleep. Rowan looked at her. He was not ready to promise anything. His left knee was swollen from the cold. His mind was still half tangled in the vault and the notebook and the painting of a soldier who looked too much like him. He was not sure he was ready for any of it. But before he could answer, Gunner's head snapped toward the front of the house. A growl rose from deep in the dog's chest. Low, controlled, not a warning bark. Something more primal. The sound a trained animal makes when it senses not just a presence, but an intent. Through the frost-covered windows of the front parlor, headlights appeared at the far end of the long driveway. Not one set. Three black SUVs crawling up through the deep snow in a slow, deliberate convoy. Their headlights cut through the last of the blizzard like the eyes of something patient and hungry. Rowan's pulse shifted. The familiar calm settled over him. Not peace. Readiness. The state his body entered before every operation. Every breach. Every moment when the world narrowed to what was in front of him and what he needed to do next. His left knee screamed as he straightened. He ignored it. Gunner moved without being told. The dog positioned himself between Rowan and the front door shoulders, square ears, pinned forwards, weight centered on all four legs. Ready? May's face went pale. She pressed Vivian's handkerchief to her chest. "That is his car," she whispered. "The man who came when Vivian was alive. The one she turned away at the door." She looked at Rowan with eyes that held 30 years of watching her only friend fight alone. "He found you already." The headlights grew brighter, closer. The sound of engines cutting through snow filled the early morning air. Rowan looked down at Gunner. The dog looked back, amber eyes steady, jaw set, waiting for his person to decide what came next. The first SUV stopped at the base of the mansion steps. The engine idled. Steam rose from the exhaust and disappeared into the cold gray dawn. The door opened, and through the swirling snow, Garrett Hollis stepped out onto the land that was no longer his to claim. He was not alone. A second man emerged from the vehicle behind him, then a woman, Celeste, and beside her, a man in a dark overcoat carrying a leather folder thick with documents. Garrett stood at the bottom of the steps, brushed snow from his shoulders, and looked up at the mansion with the expression of a man who had already decided that everything in front of him belonged to him. He smiled, and inside the house, Gunner growled again. Deeper this time. Certain. The storm had passed. But the war was just beginning. Garrett did not knock. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps with the snow settling on his shoulders and the engines of 3 black SUVs still idling behind him, their exhaust rising into the gray Montana dawn like the breath of sleeping animals. Celeste stood to his left, Arms crossed, chin lifted with the practiced posture of a woman who had never been told no. To his right, a man in a dark overcoat held a leather folder against his chest. A lawyer. Rowan could smell the profession before the man ever opened his mouth. Garrett looked up at the mansion the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Rowan. His voice carried easily through the cold air, friendly on the surface, sharp underneath. We need to talk. Rowan stood in the open doorway. Gunner was beside him, slightly forward, positioned between Rowan and the steps. The dog had not been told to do this. He had simply moved there the way water finds the lowest point. Natural. Inevitable. You drove through a blizzard to talk. Garrett smiled. Family matters, cousin. You understand. He climbed the first step. Gunner did not growl. He did not bark. He simply shifted his weight forward, and the movement was enough to make Garrett pause. There was something in the way the dog held himself. Not aggressive, not afraid, just present, like a locked door that happened to breathe. Garrett looked at the dog, then back at Rowan. Call him off. He is not on, Rowan said. He is just standing. The lawyer stepped forward, opening the leather folder. Mr. Mercer, my name is Howard Voss. I represent the Hollis family in matters of estate and asset management. We have reason to believe that the transfer of this property may have been executed under circumstances that warrant legal review. Rowan said nothing. Garrett took over. He did it smoothly, the way a man takes a steering wheel from someone he considers weaker. Here is what is happening, Rowan. Aunt Vivian was old. She was isolated. She had not spoken to the family in decades. And suddenly, she leaves a multi-million-dollar estate to someone she met once when he was 7 years old. He let the words hang. That does not look like generosity. That looks like manipulation. Rowan felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He kept his voice level. She left it to me. Legally. Witnessed. Filed. Garrett reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second folder. This one was thinner, official looking. He held it up so Rowan could see the header. Petition for emergency conservatorship. The words hit Rowan like a slap delivered in slow motion. Garrett's voice dropped lower. Almost gentle. Almost kind. The most dangerous tone he had. You have a documented history of PTSD, Rowan. You talk to your dog like he is a person. You drove through the worst storm in 50 years to reach a house owned by a woman you have not seen in 45 years. He paused. Any judge in this state would agree that you need supervised management of your affairs. Rowan's hand curled at his side, not into a fist, into something tighter, something that held years of training and discipline and the specific kind of restraint that comes from knowing exactly how much damage you are capable of and choosing not to. That is not going to happen. Garrett tilted his head. There is more. Under Montana statute, if a conservator is appointed, all assets under the ward's control are subject to review, including animals. He looked at Gunner. The dog that is registered to you as an emotional support animal would be subject to evaluation and potential reassignment. The air between them went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Rowan understood now. Garrett was not here to negotiate. He was here to threaten the only thing Rowan could not afford to lose. He looked at Gunner. The dog looked back, amber eyes steady, trusting, unaware that someone was standing 10 feet away, discussing his removal like he was a line item on a balance sheet. Something cracked open in Rowan's chest. Not grief, Something hotter, something with teeth. He took one step forward. His left knee burned, but he planted his weight on it anyway. Gunner moved with him shoulder to shoulder. "Get off my land." Garrett held up both hands, palms out, still smiling. 48 hours, Rowan. That is how long you have before I file. Sign the property over voluntarily, and you keep your dog, keep your dignity, walk away with $100,000. He paused. Or fight me and lose everything. Again. He said the last word with the same tone he had used in the courtroom, the same casual cruelty, the same absolute confidence that he held the better hand. Rowan did not move. Garrett waited 5 seconds, then 10. Then he shrugged, turned, and walked back to his SUV. Celeste followed without a word. The lawyer lingered a moment longer, placing a business card on the porch railing before retreating to the convoy. The 3 vehicles reversed down the driveway, taillights glowing red through the snow like the eyes of animals withdrawing into the trees. When the sound of the engines finally faded, Rowan realized his hands were shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, from the effort of holding still while someone threatened to take the only living thing that loved him. He knelt beside Gunner. The knee screamed. He did not care. He put both hands on the dog's face and held it. "Nobody is taking you." His voice was raw. "You hear me? Nobody." Gunner leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Rowan's. They stayed like that for a long time, while the wind swept snow across the porch, and the morning light grew slowly brighter across the mountains. May appeared in the doorway behind them. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard with something Rowan recognized. The look of a woman who had watched her best friend be terrorized by the same family and was not going to watch it happen again. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. Rowan stood. His knee popped. He exhaled slowly. "I am going to finish what Vivian started." Catherine Yates confirmed the threat the next morning over the phone. Her voice was careful, measured the way a doctor speaks when the diagnosis is serious but not yet terminal. "He can do it," she said. "Montana law allows conservatorship petitions based on documented mental health conditions. Your PTSD is in your VA records. If Garrett gets the right judge on the right day, it is not impossible." Rowan sat on the porch steps with the phone pressed to his ear and Gunner lying across his boots, refusing to be more than 6 inches away. "What do I do?" "You prove you are capable, not just of living, but of leading something. If you can show a functioning project, a community around you, a purpose, any judge will see the petition for what it is. A power grab." Rowan looked at the mansion behind him, at the windows that needed cleaning, the roof that needed patching, the rooms that waited for warmth. He looked at the notebook in his lap. Vivian's Legacy Project. Every page a blueprint for something beautiful that had never been built. He made a decision that morning that he would not fully understand until much later. He did not decide to build a sanctuary because it was noble. He decided to build it because it was the only way to keep his dog. Sometimes the right thing starts for the wrong reason, and sometimes that is enough. The first person to show up was not someone Rowan expected. 3 days after Garrett's visit, a battered red pickup truck pulled onto the Whitmore property and parked at an angle that suggested the driver either did not care about straight lines or had never met one. A man climbed out. He was 61 years old, built like a fireplace with a white beard trimmed close and hands the size of dinner plates. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the 20-degree temperature, and he carried a toolbox in one hand and a handwritten sign in the other. He walked up to the porch, nodded at Rowan knelt to scratch Gunner behind the ears, then nailed the sign to the nearest post. It read, "Dog is fine. Boss needs therapy." Then he stood, extended his hand, and said, "Bert Kinney. Heard there was a crazy veteran fixing up the old Whitmore place. Figured you could use someone who knows which end of a hammer to hold." Rowan stared at the sign, then at Bert, then back at the sign. "That is going to stay up, is it? Until something funnier comes along?" Bert grinned, which in this town could be decades. Gunner wagged his tail. Bert took that as a contract and started working. He was a carpenter by trade, retired by circumstance. His wife had passed 4 years earlier, and he had spent every day since looking for a reason to swing a hammer that was not just filling time. He talked constantly, to the wood, to the nails, to Gunner, to the mountains when no one else was listening. He called Rowan Skipper from the first hour and never used his real name again. The second person came 2 days later. Silas Trask arrived in a truck older than Rowan, parked without a word, and began stacking lumber that had been delivered that morning. He was 70 years old, tall, lean in the way that long grief makes a man lean, as if his body had been slowly giving back everything it did not absolutely need. His face was weather deep, his eyes the color of faded denim, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned that wasted motion was wasted life. He did not introduce himself. He did not explain why he had come. He simply worked, quietly, steadily, for hours. Rowan brought him coffee at noon. Silas took the cup, nodded once, and kept working. By evening, Rowan learned his name only because Bert asked him. "Silas." "That is it," Bert said, wiping sawdust from his beard. "That is enough." Gunner took to Silas immediately. The dog would lie near him while he worked, not seeking attention, not nudging for pets. Just being close, as if he sensed something in the old man that needed the presence of another living thing without the burden of conversation. Silas would look at Gunner sometimes, long, quiet looks that held something Rowan could not quite read. Then he would turn back to his work and say nothing. The third was Linnea Dahl. She arrived in a clean white truck with a surveyor's tripod in the bed and a clipboard that looked like it had seen more action than most soldiers. She was 45. Practical in the way that certain women are practical, meaning she had no patience for anything that did not serve a purpose. Her brown hair was pulled back. Her boots were steel-toed. She shook Rowan's hand with a grip that meant business and said, "I am a structural engineer. Catherine Yates called me. Said you need someone who knows whether this house will hold or fold." She spent 6 hours crawling through the foundation, the attic, and every load-bearing wall in between. When she came back, she was dusty from head to boots, and her verdict was delivered without emotion. Foundation is solid, built to last 300 years. She looked at Rowan. The house is fine. The person living in it, I am less sure about. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. Together, the four of them began the work. Bert handled carpentry and morale. Silas handled everything heavy and said nothing. Linnea handled structure safety and the kind of organizational precision that kept the project from collapsing into chaos. And Rowan held it all together, moving between them, learning their rhythms, trying to remember what it felt like to be part of a team. Gunner was everywhere, carrying Bert's dropped gloves back to him, lying beside Silas during breaks, following Linnea through the basement as she checked support beams. The dog moved through the group like a thread binding them together, connecting each person to the next through the simple act of being present. May came every afternoon. She did not swing hammers or carry lumber. She brought food, casseroles wrapped in foil, thermoses of coffee, cornbread that Bert declared was the single greatest achievement of Western civilization. She sat in the kitchen while the others worked, and she told stories about Vivian, about the garden she planted, about the books she loved, about the way she would stand on the balcony in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold, and whisper to herself, as if she were having a conversation with someone only she could see. The house began to change, slowly at first. A repaired window here, a cleared room there, but each small improvement carried a weight far beyond its physical measure. Each nail driven, each board replaced, each layer of dust swept away felt like an act of remembrance, as if the mansion itself was being reminded of what it was supposed to be. On the 5th day, Bert noticed a man standing at the edge of the property near the tree line. He was holding a camera. Bert walked toward him with the unhurried confidence of a man who had been swinging hammers since before the stranger was born. The man left quickly. Bert came back and nailed a new sign next to the first one. Area monitored by dog and deranged carpenter. Rowan looked at the sign. Garrett is watching us. Bert shrugged. Then let us give him something worth watching. But Garrett was doing more than watching. On the 7th morning, Rowan walked into the old storage shed behind the mansion to retrieve tools. Gunner was with him. The dog entered first, as always, scanning the space with his nose before Rowan crossed the threshold. The shed was cold and dim. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with old paint cans and garden equipment. A single window on the far wall let in a rectangle of gray light, except the window was broken, not cracked by weather, not split by age. Shattered inward, the glass scattered across the floor in sharp, glittering fragments, and in the snow outside, the window boot prints. Large, deep, fresh. Someone had broken in during the night. Rowan crouched to examine the glass pattern. His training told him what the scene was before his conscious mind caught up. Deliberate entry. Single point of impact. Someone had used a tool, a crowbar, or a heavy rock, the kind of damage that does not happen by accident. Gunner moved through the shed, sniffing carefully. Then he yelped. Rowan spun. The dog had stepped on a shard of glass. A piece had sliced into the pad of his front left paw. Not deep, not dangerous, but enough to draw a thin line of red across the concrete floor. Everything in Rowan compressed into a single point of focus. He was on the ground beside Gunner before the dog had finished lifting his paw. His hands moved with the speed of a man who had treated wounds under fire. He cradled the paw, examined the cut-applied pressure with his sleeve. But his breathing was wrong. Too fast. Too shallow. His eyes were too wide. This was not about a cut on a paw, and some part of him knew that. But the rest of him was already somewhere else. Already in the place where wounds meant losing someone, where blood on the ground meant he had failed to protect the one thing he was supposed to protect. He scooped Gunner up. 85 pounds of dog in his arms, and his left knee nearly gave out, but he held. He carried the dog out of the shed across the yard, shouting for help. Bert met him halfway. Linnea called the veterinarian. Silas cleared a space on the porch. The vet arrived within the hour. A calm woman with steady hands who cleaned the cut, applied a bandage, and said the words Rowan needed to hear more than anything in the world. He will be fine. Just keep it clean. A few days, and he will not even remember it. Rowan exhaled. The sound that came out of him was not relief. It was something deeper. Something that had been holding since the moment he saw blood on the floor. The vet looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Mercer. The cut was minor, 1/4 inch. She paused. What are you really trying to fix here? The shed, or yourself? Rowan did not answer. He just sat on the porch with Gunner's head in his lap and his hand resting on the bandaged paw, and he breathed, in and out, slowly, the way Gunner had taught him. That afternoon, while Rowan was replacing the broken window in the shed, a sound came from the house. The sharp, sudden crack of a dropped beam hitting the floor. It was loud enough to echo off the mountains, and it took Rowan back. The crack became a blast. The shed became a street in Kandahar. The sawdust in the air became sand. The cold became heat. And the shouting he heard was not Bert calling his name from the porch, but his squad leader screaming coordinates into a radio that was not receiving. Rowan dropped the hammer. His knees hit the ground. His hands went to his head. His eyes were open, but he was not in Montana. He was in the war. He was always in the war. It lived behind the thinnest wall, and all it needed was a crack to come flooding through. His breathing spiraled, fast, shallow, useless. His chest felt like it was being compressed by something enormous. His fingers clawed at the dirt. Then warmth. Against his side. Pressing in. Gunner. Paw still bandaged. Moving with a limp, but moving without hesitation. The dog had crossed the yard the moment the sound hit. He pressed his full body against Rowan's left side, laid his head across Rowan's thigh, and breathed, slow, deep, in, out, the rhythm that was older than language, older than war, the rhythm that said, I am here and you are here, and this moment is the only one that matters. Rowan's right hand found Gunner's fur. He gripped it, held on. Let the rise and fall of the dog's rib cage become the anchor that kept him from drowning. 30 seconds. A minute. The sand faded. The heat cooled. Montana came back. The mountains. The trees. The shed with its new window pane. The sound of Bert's radio playing country music from somewhere inside the house. I am here, Rowan whispered. I am here. He did not know how long Silas had been standing at the shed door. The old man leaned against the frame, saying nothing. Not judging, not pitying, just present. Waiting for Rowan to come back on his own terms. When Rowan finally looked up, Silas met his eyes with a steadiness that held no surprise, as if he had seen this before, as if he had lived it. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things that did not need to be said, full of a recognition that passes between men who have carried weight that most people will never understand. Then Silas spoke. Quietly, not to fill the silence, but to share something he had carried alone for decades, something he had never told anyone, something that lived in the deepest, coldest room of his heart, and that he was choosing in this moment to open. My boy used to call the sound of engines dragons. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper. He was 9 years old. He would sit on the porch and listen to the trucks go by on the highway, and he would roar at them, big roars, loud ones, like he was trying to match their power. He was fearless about everything, Snakes, heights, the dark. Nothing scared that boy. Silas paused, his hand resting on his knee, opened and closed slowly. Lightning took him. Summer storm. He was standing in the field watching the clouds come in. He loved storms, loved watching them roll across the valley like a show just for him. I was inside making dinner. Hamburgers. He wanted hamburgers that night. Another pause. Longer. The kind of silence that holds the shape of something too heavy for words. I heard the sound. By the time I reached him, the dragons had gone quiet. He did not explain further. He did not say his son's name. He did not describe what he saw in that field, or the years that followed, or the specific way a man's soul cracks when the thing he was put on earth to protect is taken by something as indifferent and absolute as weather. He did not need to. Rowan knew. Every soldier knows. Loss does not require a war. It only requires love and time and the merciless randomness of a world that does not negotiate. Rowan looked at Silas. Silas looked back. Two men who had buried something precious and kept walking. Not because they were strong, because stopping was not something they knew how to do. Gunner's tail thumped once against Rowan's leg. Soft. Sure. A small sound in a large silence, but it was enough. Silas turned and went back to work. His boots left steady tracks in the sawdust. His back was straight. His hands were steady. Whatever he carried it upright. And after a few minutes, Rowan stood too, brushed the dirt from his knees, picked up his hammer, and went back to building something worth believing in. Garrett's next move came not against Rowan, but against May. It was the kind of cruelty that did not leave bruises, the kind that worked in silence through paper and procedure, through the slow tightening of invisible ropes around a person's daily life. On a Wednesday afternoon, May called Rowan. Her voice was different, smaller. The warmth that normally ran through her words like a low fire had been replaced by something thin and uncertain. The voice of a woman who had been reminded suddenly and completely that she was 68 years old and lived alone on a mountain road, and that the world contained people who would use that against her. A man came to my house today, she said. A lawyer. He stood on my porch and read from a document. He told me that the road to my property crosses Hollis family land. Land your mother left to Garrett and Celeste. He said if I continue to assist in what he called the unauthorized occupation of the Whitmore estate, they will petition to restrict access to my home. Rowan gripped the phone so hard the case creaked. The wood of the porch railing groaned under his other hand. May, I am sorry. He is using you to get to me. May was quiet for a moment. The wind crackled through the phone line. When she spoke again, her voice wavered, but the words themselves did not. Vivian never backed down from them. Not once. Not even when she was sick. Not even when she knew she was dying and they came to the door one last time and she stood there in her bathrobe and her slippers and told them to leave and never come back. May paused. She was braver than anyone I have ever known. And I will not be the one who lets her down now. But her voice trembled on the last word, and Rowan could hear in that trembling the sound of a woman who was choosing courage while fear sat heavy on her chest. Rowan stood on the porch after the call ended, looking out at the mountains. The sky was the color of hammered steel. Gunner sat beside him, leaning his weight against Rowan's good leg, as if he could feel the tension running through Rowan's body and was trying to absorb some of it. The equation was changing. This was no longer about Rowan and a house and a dead woman's dream. Garrett had drawn May into the crossfire, a 68-year-old widow who lived alone and whose only offense was loving her friend and bringing cornbread to a construction site. Rowan had two choices. Pull back. Let May be safe. Let Garrett win through the slow, patient cruelty of threatening the people around him one by one until no one was left standing. Or keep going and accept that everyone who stood beside him would become a target. He thought about the men he had served with who chose to advance under fire. Not because they were brave, because retreat meant leaving someone exposed. He thought about Vivian, who had built everything alone because she had no one willing to stand with her, who had died alone in a house full of rooms designed for other people. He was not going to let that happen again. The next morning, Catherine Yates filed a formal complaint against Garrett for witness intimidation. She also called the county assessor's office and confirmed what she suspected. The road to May's property was a county-maintained easement, public right-of-way since 1962. Garrett had no legal authority to block it. The lawyer who had stood on May's porch and read from that document had either known this and not cared, or had not bothered to check. Either way, it was a bluff built on a foundation of cruelty. When Rowan drove to May's house that afternoon and told her she was quiet for a long time, she sat in her kitchen chair with Vivian's handkerchief in her hands, and she looked out the window at the road that had always been hers and would always be hers. Then she said, "I will be there tomorrow with cornbread." Bert, who had insisted on coming along, said from the doorway, "If she stops bringing cornbread, I am switching sides." Nobody laughed, but something in the air lightened, just a little. The way a room lightens when someone opens a curtain and lets in even a thin line of sun. Garrett filed the conservatorship petition on a Friday. The courtroom in Silver Creek was smaller than the one in Bozeman. Older. The wood was darker, the windows taller, the silence heavier. It felt like a place where decisions were made slowly and meant something. Rowan sat at the front with Judge Dalton Webb beside him. Webb was 67, retired from the bench for 5 years, but still licensed to practice. He had known Vivian. He had handled some of her legal affairs. When Catherine asked him to represent Rowan, he said yes before she finished the sentence. Garrett sat across the aisle with Howard Voss and 2 additional attorneys. They had brought thick folders, printed photographs, official documents. Voss stood and addressed the court with the polished confidence of a man who had done this many times before and expected it to go his way again. "Your Honor, we present evidence that Mr. Rowan Mercer suffers from a documented condition that significantly impairs his ability to manage assets of this magnitude. He has a history of post-traumatic stress episodes requiring ongoing treatment. He has been observed engaging in prolonged verbal communication with his animal companion as though the animal were a human being capable of understanding complex speech. He has undertaken the management of a multi-million-dollar estate renovation with no prior experience in property development, construction management, or financial administration. And he has exhibited behavior consistent with emotional instability, including an incident in which he carried his 85-pound dog across a yard in apparent distress over a minor cut that required no veterinary intervention." He placed a stack of photographs on the table. Rowan recognized every single one. They had been taken from the tree line over the course of days, maybe weeks. Each one captured a moment that, stripped of context, looked exactly the way Garrett wanted it to look. Rowan kneeling in the dirt after the PTSD episode, his face contorted with anguish. Rowan carrying Gunner across the yard, the dog's paw wrapped in a bloody sleeve. Rowan sitting on the porch steps talking to Gunner, his hands moving as he spoke, looking for all the world like a man having a conversation with himself. Moments of vulnerability. Moments of pain and love and the kind of raw, unguarded humanity that soldiers are trained to hide and that the world punishes them for showing. Framed as evidence of incompetence. Rowan's jaw tightened. Under the table, Gunner pressed his shoulder against Rowan's calf. A steady pressure that said, "I am here. I know. Hold." Judge Webb stood slowly. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself with a kind of authority that does not come from volume. It comes from decades of listening. "Your Honor," he said, "I would like to present the following." He placed a USB drive on the table. This is an audio recording made by Vivian Whitmore before her death. It was entrusted to me with instructions to play it in the event that her chosen heir faced legal challenge from her family. The judge allowed it. Vivian's voice filled the courtroom. Warm, clear, steady. The voice of a woman who had spent decades preparing for this exact moment. If you are hearing this, then they are trying again. My estate is not theirs. Rowan is my rightful heir. He has the heart this family lost a long time ago. I watched him. I chose him. And I did not make this choice lightly. The courtroom went still. Even Garrett stopped fidgeting. Then Linnea Dahl took the stand. She was not nervous. She was not dramatic. She simply laid out the facts with the precision of an engineer reading blueprints. She described the legacy project, the structural assessments, the renovation timeline, the team Rowan had assembled, the daily progress logs he kept, the budgets he managed, the decisions he made with clarity and purpose. This is not the behavior of a man who cannot manage his affairs, she said. This is the behavior of a leader executing a mission. I have worked with developers and contractors for 20 years. Mr. Mercer is among the most organized and disciplined project managers I have encountered. The judge denied the petition. Garrett stood. His composure cracked for the first time. The smooth confidence peeled back, and underneath it was something raw and hungry. He walked past Rowan's table and leaned close enough that only Rowan could hear. You think winning one hearing ends this? I will file again next month. And the month after. And the month after that. Until you are too tired or too broke to keep fighting. That is how this works, cousin. I do not need to win. I just need to make you quit. He straightened, smiled at the gallery, walked out. Rowan sat in the courtroom long after everyone else had left. Gunner lay at his feet. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the faint sound of wind pressing against the windows. Garrett's words played on repeat in his mind. I do not need to win. I just need to make you quit. He thought about Vivian, about the journal entries from her final months, the handwriting growing shakier, the tone growing quieter, the last pages where she wrote not about plans or projects but about silence, about the sound of a house that held only one heartbeat, about the weight of building something magnificent and having no one to share it with. They did not need to beat her. Rowan realized they just waited, and the loneliness did the rest. That night, alone in the mansion, Rowan sat in Vivian's studio on the 3rd floor. The painting of the soldier and the dog watched from the easel. The skylights showed a clear sky full of cold, distant stars. He opened Vivian's journal to the last entries, the ones May had not wanted him to read. I am so tired. The handwriting was barely legible. I built everything I dreamed of building, and I will die in this house alone. They did not need to destroy me. They just needed to wait. Loneliness does the work of 100 enemies. It is patient, and it is thorough, and it never sleeps. Rowan closed the journal. His hands were trembling. He looked around the studio, at the paintings Vivian had poured her soul into, at the brushes she had held with the same hands that signed the documents that built an empire from nothing, at the easels standing like monuments to a life that had been brilliant and bold and utterly devastatingly solitary. This was what winning looked like for Vivian. This studio, this house, $265 million locked in a vault beneath her feet, and a death that came quietly without witness, without anyone to hold her hand or hear her last words. Rowan had $265 million. He had a mansion. He had a project. He had a team that showed up every morning and worked until the light failed. And he was terrified. Not of Garrett. Garrett was a known quantity. A man driven by greed and entitlement. Dangerous, but predictable. Not of courtrooms or legal threats or the endless bureaucratic machinery that Garrett could set in motion. Rowan was terrified of something much older, much closer to the bone, something that had lived inside him since long before the war, since the day his mother first looked at him as though he were a stranger in her house. He was afraid of caring. He was afraid that if he let this place into his heart, truly let it in, if he let May's laughter and Bert's jokes and Silas's silence and Linnea's competence and the way Gunner's tail wagged when they pulled into the driveway each morning, if he let all of that matter, then one day it would be taken away. The way his family was taken, the way his squad members were taken, the way everything good in his life had always eventually been taken. He was afraid that finishing the project meant losing the only thing keeping him alive, that the work itself was the purpose, and that when the work was done, he would discover there was nothing underneath, just a man and a dog and a hollow place where meaning used to be. He was afraid of becoming Vivian, building something beautiful and dying inside it alone. Rowan picked up his phone and called Silas. The old man answered on the fourth ring. His voice was rough with sleep. I think I need to sell it, Rowan said. Sign it over to Garrett. Take whatever he offers and drive until I run out of road. Silas was quiet for a long time. Rowan could hear the wind on the other end of the line and the faint creak of a rocking chair. Then Silas spoke, not with anger, not with urgency, with the flat, certain weight of a man who had been to the bottom and come back with one truth he would not let go of. Quitting is not rest, Rowan. Quitting is exile. Rowan closed his eyes. Silas continued, I know what it looks like when a man is standing at the door with his bag packed and his mind made up. I have stood there myself. After my boy died, I stood at that door every single night for 2 years. And every night I told myself that leaving would make the hurting stop. He paused. It does not stop. It follows you. The only difference is whether you carry it alone on some road that goes nowhere, or you carry it here, where there are people willing to help you hold it. Another pause. Longer. I am not letting lightning take another one. The line went dead. Rowan sat in the studio with the phone in his lap and the silence pressing in from every direction. The painting watched him. The stars watched him. The house held its breath. He stood, picked up his bag, walked down the stairs, through the second-floor hallway, down the grand staircase, past the parlor, past the kitchen where May had told him stories about Vivian, past the shelf where Bert had placed a framed photo of the team standing in front of the mansion with Gunner in the center. He reached the front door. His hand touched the handle, cold brass against his palm, and Gunner was there, not running, not scrambling to catch up, not alerted by the sound of footsteps or the creak of the stairs. He was already there, standing between Rowan and the door, as if he had taken his position hours ago and had been waiting with the patient certainty of an animal who understands things that humans have forgotten how to feel. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He did not whine or paw at the ground or make any sound at all. He simply stood, shoulders squared, ears pinned forward, 4 legs planted on the cold floor with the weight and stillness of something rooted to the earth. His amber eyes were locked on Rowan's face, and in them was an expression that held no confusion, no anxiety, no uncertainty of any kind. Just a single, absolute declaration. "No. Move," Rowan said. Gunner did not move, not a muscle, not a hair. His breathing was slow and even, and his gaze did not waver. Rowan stepped to the left. Gunner shifted with him. Smooth, unhurried. Not a lunge or a block, but a repositioning so natural it looked choreographed, as if the dog had anticipated the movement before Rowan's body made it. Rowan stepped to the right. Gunner was already there, centered, calm, immovable. "Come on." Rowan's voice broke on the second word. The crack ran through it, like a fault line splitting open after years of pressure. "Get out of the way." Gunner sat, right there in front of the door, on the cold marble floor of the entry hall. He sat with the posture of a military dog at formal attention. Back straight, head high, eyes forward, looking up at the man who had carried him through fire and held him through nightmares, and shared every meal and every silence, and every mile of road they had traveled together. And Gunner did not move. Rowan felt his legs go. Not a collapse, not a fall. Something slower and deeper, like the moment a building that has been standing on a cracked foundation finally settles. His knees found the floor. His hands found Gunner's fur. His forehead pressed against the dog's broad, warm shoulder, and he held on the way a drowning man holds on to the one solid thing in a current that is pulling him under. "I am tired." The words came out in pieces, broken syllables, sounds more than language. "I am so tired." Gunner leaned into him, the full weight of 85 pounds pressing against Rowan's chest, not pushing him back, holding him up. The warmth of the dog's body soaked through Rowan's shirt and into his skin and into the places beneath his skin where the cold had lived for so many years that he had forgotten what warmth felt like. Then Gunner licked Rowan's hand. Once. Slow. Deliberate. The way a mother touches a child's forehead to check for fever. The way a friend places a hand on your shoulder when there is nothing left to say. And again. Twice. The silence that followed was the largest thing in the house. Larger than the vault. Larger than the fortune. Larger than all the rooms and all the paintings and all the years of emptiness that had filled them. It was the silence that comes at the very bottom of something, the moment when falling stops and the only direction left is up. In that silence, something inside Rowan shifted. Not healed. He knew better than to call it healing. Not fixed, because the broken parts of a man are not gears that can be replaced. It shifted, like a bone that has been out of alignment for years, finally settling back toward where it belongs. It hurt. It hurt more than the knee, more than the courtroom, more than the memory of his mother's silence. But it was the kind of hurt that comes before something can begin to grow. Rowan took his hands off the door handle. He set the bag down on the floor. He sat there with his dog in the dark hallway, and he breathed. In the morning, he sent a text to Silas, Bert, and Linnea. 2 words. "Keep going." Bert texted back, "About time. Gunner told me you would come around." Silas did not text back, but when Rowan walked outside an hour later, the old man was already at the property, stacking lumber, saying nothing, staying. Linnea arrived at 8 with revised blueprints that accounted for the 3rd floor renovations. She handed them to Rowan without ceremony. "Page 4 has the updated load calculations. You are welcome." And at noon, May came up the driveway. She did not bring casseroles this time. She walked slowly, her thin coat buttoned to the throat, Vivian's wooden box held against her chest, the way she had held it the first night Rowan met her. She climbed the porch steps one at a time, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She stopped at the front door, looked at the mansion, looked at Rowan. Then she stepped inside. For the first time since Vivian died, May Pruitt walked into the house where her best friend had lived and dreamed and built and died alone. She moved through the entry hall, slowly touching the walls with her fingertips. The wallpaper was faded and peeling. The chandeliers were still dusty. But the floor was clean, and the windows had been washed, and somewhere deeper in the house, the sound of Bert's hammer kept a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. May stopped in the kitchen, the room where she and Vivian had drunk coffee on winter mornings for 30 years, where they had talked about books and gardens and the particular loneliness of women who had outlived the people they loved most. Where Vivian had laughed her rare bright laugh that sounded like surprise, as if joy kept catching her off guard. Where May had cried the day her own husband passed, and Vivian had said nothing, and held her hand for 3 hours straight, and never once let go. The room smelled different now, like sawdust and fresh paint, and the particular warmth of people working together toward something. But underneath it, if she breathed deep enough, May could still catch it. The ghost of coffee. The ghost of lavender. The ghost of her best friend standing at that stove with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, humming something off-key. She placed her palm flat against the wall, closed her eyes. Her lips moved, but no sound came. A conversation with someone who could no longer answer, but who May believed with the quiet faith of a woman who had loved deeply and been loved in return, was still listening somewhere close. She would have loved this, May whispered. She would have stood right here and cried and then told everyone to stop loafing and get back to work. She stood there for a long time. The winter light through the window fell across her face and turned the tears on her cheeks to small points of silver. Then she pulled a chair from the corner, the same chair she had always sat in, the one nearest the window where the morning light was warmest. She set it down, smoothed her coat, and sat. She did not leave. Gunner walked to her and sat at her feet. His chin came to rest gently on her knee. May reached down and placed her hand on his head, her fingers moving slowly through the fur the way they had that first night on the porch steps when a dog she had never met pressed against her as if he had known her forever. The dog exhaled, a long, settling breath, the sound of something finding its place. Rowan watched from the doorway. He did not speak. He did not need to. Some moments are complete on their own. They do not need another voice. They simply are. May was home, and she was not leaving again. That evening, after the tools were put away and the others had gone, Linnea found it. She had been inspecting the basement foundation near the north wall when her flashlight caught something unusual, a section of brickwork that did not match the rest. Newer mortar, a different pattern, as if someone had sealed a doorway that was never meant to be sealed. She called Rowan down. Together with Gunner watching from the top of the basement stairs, they removed the bricks one by one. Behind them was a small chamber barely larger than a closet. Inside were two things. The first was a metal box containing documents, financial records, security camera footage saved to USB drives, photographs showing a man at the vault door of the mansion. The man was Garrett. The images were time-stamped. Some were from 3 years ago, some from 2, some from just months before Vivian died. He had come here while she was alive. More than once. He had found the vault. He had tried to force it open. The scratches on the vault door matched the tools shown in one of the photographs. Vivian had caught him on camera every single time. The second item was an envelope, cream-colored paper, Vivian's handwriting. It was addressed simply to my family. A letter she had written, but never sent. Rowan held the envelope in the dim light of the basement, the weight of it far heavier than paper should be. Gunner came down the stairs and sat beside him, pressed his shoulder against Rowan's leg. Above them, the house was quiet. Outside, the first stars were appearing over the mountains. And somewhere in town, Garrett was planning his next move, unaware that the walls of his own deception were about to close in around him. Rowan turned the envelope over in his hands. Whatever was inside had the power to end this, or to make it far, far worse. He looked at Gunner. The dog looked back, steady, waiting. Tomorrow, Rowan whispered. We open it tomorrow. He tucked the envelope inside his coat next to his heart and climbed the stairs into the darkness of the house that was slowly, painfully becoming something Vivian always knew it could be. A home. Rowan opened the letter at dawn. He sat in Vivian's kitchen with the cream-colored envelope in his hands and the first light of morning pressing through the frost on the windows. The house was quiet. Bert had not arrived yet. Silas was not yet standing at the lumber pile. Linnea's white truck was not yet parked in its precise parallel spot beside the porch. It was just Rowan and Gunner and the letter that Vivian Whitmore had written to her family and never sent. The envelope was soft with age. The wax seal on the back had been pressed but never broken. She had sealed it. She had addressed it. She had held it in her hands and decided at some point that the risk of sending it was greater than the pain of keeping it. Gunner lay at Rowan's feet, chin on his paws, watching with the patient focus of a dog who understood that his person was about to touch something fragile. Rowan broke the seal. The paper inside was a single page. Vivian's handwriting filled it completely, margin to margin, as if she had so much to say that even the edges of the page could not contain it. But the words themselves were not angry. They were not bitter. They were not the words of a woman seeking revenge or demanding justice or cataloging the injuries she had received. They were the words of a woman who had forgiven the people who destroyed her and could not bring herself to tell them. To my family, I have spent 40 years building a life without you. I want you to know that I succeeded. I built something beautiful and lasting and filled with purpose. I want you to know that I did this not to prove you wrong, but because building was the only way I knew how to survive what you did to me. Rowan's hands tightened on the paper. I also want you to know that I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because you asked, but because carrying the weight of what you did has made me tired in ways that money cannot fix and walls cannot protect against. I forgive you because I am running out of time, and I do not want to die with your names still caught in my throat like stones I never learned to swallow. Gunner shifted, pressed his shoulder against Rowan's ankle. But I will not send this letter. I know what you would do with my forgiveness. You would use it as permission. You would read these words and hear weakness. You would come to my door with your lawyers and your papers and your bright, empty smiles, and you would take everything I built and turn it into something small and cold and yours. So I will keep this letter, and I will keep my forgiveness. And I will die knowing that I loved you anyway, even though you never once loved me back. Vivian. Rowan set the letter down on the table. He did not fold it. He did not put it back in the envelope. He just set it there face up in the morning light, and he looked at it the way a man looks at a mirror that shows him something he recognizes, but wishes he did not. Vivian had been afraid of the same thing he was afraid of, not of her family's cruelty, not of losing her fortune or her house. She was afraid of opening the door, afraid that the people she reached toward would use her vulnerability as a weapon, afraid that love offered honestly would be received as weakness. And so she had kept the door closed, and she had died behind it. May arrived an hour later. She came through the back door the way she always did now, carrying a basket of biscuits and a thermos of coffee, her thin coat buttoned tight against the cold. She saw the letter on the table and stopped. She did not ask what it said. She could see it in Rowan's face. She sat down across from him. Gunner moved to her and placed his head on her knee. May rested her hand on the dog's ear and waited. Rowan pushed the letter across the table. May read it slowly. Her lips moved with the words. When she reached the end, she did not look up for a long time. Her hand found Vivian's handkerchief in her coat pocket, and she held it against her chest the way she always did when the grief came close enough to touch. I begged her to send it. May's voice was barely a whisper. I sat right here in this kitchen and I told her that they needed to hear it, that forgiveness was not weakness, that reaching out was not the same as letting them in. She paused. A tear moved slowly down the crease beside her nose. She said to me, May, if they do not want me, at least I will not have to hear them say it again. The kitchen was silent except for the wind against the windows and the soft sound of Gunner breathing. Rowan looked at the letter, then at May, then at his own hands, scarred and calloused and shaking slightly on the table. He understood now what he needed to do. Not send the letter, not reach out to the family that had thrown Vivian away. Something different. Something that honored the courage she could not find and completed the gesture she could not make. He was going to open the door that Vivian kept closed, not to the family, to everyone else. He was going to take the house she built in isolation and fill it with the warmth she designed it to hold. He was going to finish the legacy project not as a monument to Vivian's memory, but as a correction of Vivian's fear. She built everything but could not let anyone in, Rowan said quietly. I am going to let them in. May looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was something Rowan had not seen on her face before. Hope. The specific, cautious, hard-won hope of a woman who had spent 2 years sitting in an empty house waiting for something to change. Then let us get to work, she said. The final weeks were the hardest. Garrett, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, escalated. He filed a federal lawsuit claiming fraudulent transfer of assets. His lawyers produced documents, contracts, letters that painted Vivian as mentally unstable in her final years. The claims were built on half-truths and manufactured timelines, but they were dense enough and numerous enough to require response. At the same time, the deadline for the mansion's safety certification pressed in like a closing fist. 2 weeks before the first heavy snow of the season. If the renovation was not complete and inspected by then, the building could not legally open as a public facility until spring. 6 months of momentum lost. Rowan stood on the porch one morning and looked at the mountain of work still ahead. His knee ached. His back was stiff from sleeping on a cot in the second-floor hallway because half the bedrooms were still being rewired. Gunner sat beside him, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of amber and rose. We have 14 days, Rowan said to no one in particular. Gunner's ear twitched. The team answered. Bert moved into the mansion. He set up a cot in the parlor and worked from dawn until he could not see his own hands. He sang while he worked, old country songs, most of them off-key, all of them delivered with the conviction of a man who believed that music was as structural as a load-bearing wall. He nailed a new sign to the front door each morning. Day 1 read, 13 days left. Dog believes in us. Day 7 read 7 days. Roof done. Bert needs chiropractor. Silas made phone calls, quiet ones, to numbers he had not dialed in years. Former soldiers, old friends from other wars and other lifetimes. Men and women who had served and come home to the same silence he had come home to. They arrived in 1s and 2s. A plumber from Helena. An electrician from Great Falls, a woman who had done 3 tours in Iraq and now ran a contracting company in Billings. They did not ask for pay. They asked where to start. Linnea managed everything. She moved through the mansion with her clipboard and her steel-toed boots, and her absolute refusal to accept anything less than structural perfection. She caught errors before they became problems. She redesigned the 3rd-floor bathroom layout in an afternoon when the original plumbing proved unsalvageable. She told Bert his singing was a violation of building codes, and Bert told her she was his favorite person he had ever been afraid of. May cooked. She cooked for 12, then for 20, then for 30, as more volunteers arrived. Her kitchen, Vivian's kitchen, became the heart of the operation. The smell of bread and soup and strong coffee drifted through the hallways and into the rooms where people worked and laughed and hammered and painted and slowly, steadily turned a mansion into a home. Gunner was everywhere. He carried drop tools back to their owners. He sat beside anyone who paused to rest, pressing his warm side against tired legs. He followed the children of the volunteers through the hallways, patient and gentle, letting small hands grab his ears and pull his tail without complaint. At night, he slept beside Rowan's cot, and every few hours he would rise, walk the perimeter of the house, check each room, then return and settle back down with a long, satisfied exhale. He was guarding the place, all of it, every person in it. Judge Dalton Webb worked the legal front. He filed the evidence Linnea had found in the sealed basement room, the photographs of Garrett at the vault door, the timestamps, the security footage Vivian had saved, and alongside it, the financial records showing that Garrett had accessed the probate court filings for Rowan's mother's will 6 months before her death, that he had met with the attorney who drafted the will, that changes had been made to the document in that final meeting, changes that removed Rowan's name entirely. The evidence was submitted to the federal court. Garrett's lawsuit was not just dismissed, it was referred for criminal investigation, fraud, forgery, tampering with legal documents, attempted burglary of the Whitmore estate. Garrett Hollis, who had walked into the Bozeman courthouse with a smirk and a sense of ownership over everything he could see, was now facing the possibility of walking into a very different kind of room. The sanctuary was ready on the morning of the 14th day. Rowan stood on the front porch at 7 in the morning. The sun was not yet above the peaks. The air was sharp and clean and carried the smell of pine and fresh paint and the particular sweetness of new wood that has not yet been touched by weather. Gunner sat beside him, ears forward, tail resting on the porch boards. The dog had been up since 5, walking the perimeter of the house in the dark, checking every entrance, every window, every corner, as if he understood that today was different, that today the house would become what it was always meant to be. Behind them, the mansion had been transformed. The stone walls were clean and repointed. The windows gleamed in the early light. The balconies had been rebuilt and now held wooden planters that Bert had carved with pine branch patterns to match the original architecture. The roof was solid. The wiring was new. The plumbing worked. Every room smelled of paint and polish and the particular hope that comes from people working together towards something they believe in. The front door was the last piece. A massive slab of oak original to the house that had been sanded and refinished and fitted with new brass hinges and a handle that Bert had forged himself in a friend's workshop. People began arriving by 8. The crowd gathered on the lawn. When the moment came, Rowan stepped to the door. Gunner stood beside him. The crowd went quiet. Rowan gripped the handle and pulled. The door did not move. He pulled harder. Nothing. The hinges held fast. The wood seemed fused to the frame, locked in place by some invisible resistance that no amount of force could break. Rowan braced his foot against the threshold and pulled with everything he had. His left knee screamed. His shoulders strained. The door groaned, but stayed shut. Silence fell across the lawn. The kind of silence that holds its breath. Bert, standing near the railing, broke it. His voice carried warm and easy across the crowd. "That is just Vivian checking our work one last time, making sure we did it right." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Then Silas stepped forward, and Linnea, and May moving slowly but steady. They placed their hands on the door beside Rowan's. Bert came down from the railing and added his grip. 5 people, 1 door, and a dog sitting beside them, tail flat on the ground, eyes bright, waiting. They pulled together. The door resisted for 1 more second. 2. Then something in the old wood released. The hinges gave way with a sound like a long-held sigh, and the massive oak slab swung open, and the morning sunlight poured into the entry hall of the Whitmore mansion in a wide golden flood that reached all the way to the grand staircase and lit up the crystal drops of the chandelier above. Bert let out a whistle that echoed off the stone walls. Silas stood still. His eyes glistened. His jaw was set the way a soldier's jaw sets when he is holding something back that he will not let the world see. But his hand resting at his side trembled once. Linnea nodded. A single precise nod. The nod of an engineer who has verified that the structure is sound and the work is done, and everything is exactly as it should be. May stepped through the door first. She crossed the threshold with the slow, careful steps of a woman returning to a place she thought she had lost forever. She stopped in the middle of the entry hall, turned in a slow circle, and looked at the light filling every corner. "Vivian," she whispered, "we are home." Gunner's ears came forward. His tail lifted. His amber eyes caught the sunlight and held it, and for a moment the dog seemed to glow, standing there in the open doorway between the world outside and the world that Vivian Whitmore had spent her life imagining. Inside the therapy rooms were complete. Soft lighting, large windows facing the mountains, comfortable chairs arranged in circles. The communal kitchen was stocked and warm. The library held every one of Vivian's books organized by Linnea with a cataloging system that would have made a university librarian weep with admiration. The third-floor healing wing had 10 private rooms each, with a bed, a window, a reading lamp, and enough sound insulation that a man could cry in the night without being heard by anyone except the dog sleeping at his door. A sign hung above the entrance carved by Bert from a plank of local pine. Timber Ridge Veteran Sanctuary, founded on the dream of Vivian Whitmore, built by the hands of those who understood. People began arriving by 8. Townspeople, veterans from across the state, local officials, families, children. They came in trucks and sedans and one old bus that Silas had arranged to transport a group of elderly veterans from a care facility in Missoula. They gathered on the lawn in the cold morning air, their breath making small clouds that rose and mixed together. Rowan stood on the steps with Gunner at his side. Judge Webb approached with a warm, quiet smile. "You did it, son. She would be proud." Rowan looked at the mansion, at the windows that now caught the light and threw it back in bright, clean planes. "I had help," he said, "more than I realized." The ceremony began. Town leaders spoke. Veterans shared stories. Some spoke of service. Some spoke of loss. Some could not speak at all and simply stood and let the silence say what words could not. Then Rowan took the podium. He had not prepared remarks. He had tried the night before, sitting on his cot with a notepad and a pen. But everything he wrote sounded too polished, too distant from the truth. So he set the notepad aside and decided to speak from the place where the words lived. "I did not inherit this place because of blood," he began. His voice was steady, but not smooth. It had the texture of something real. "I inherited it because someone believed in who I could become, even on the days I could not believe it myself." Gunner nudged his hand. Rowan rested his palm on the dog's head and continued. "This house is not about money. It is not about land or old family arguments or who deserves what. This house is about healing. It is about the fact that some people come home from war and discover that the hardest battle is the one waiting for them in the silence of their own living room." He paused. The crowd was still. The only sound was the wind moving through the pines. Vivian Whitmore knew what it meant to be cast out. She spent her life building something so that no one else would have to feel that alone. She did not finish it. So we did. And this sanctuary is for every veteran who needs a place to land, every family that needs support, and every person who has ever wondered if tomorrow could be better than today. It can. I am proof of that. And so is every person standing here. He stepped back. The crowd erupted, not loudly, not with the sharp crack of applause at a stadium, with something warmer. The rolling, sustained sound of many hands clapping slowly, deliberately, the way people clap when they are not performing approval, but expressing something that lives deeper than noise. May stood near the front. She did not clap. She held Vivian's handkerchief against her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and the tears fell freely, and she did not try to stop them. Bert put his arm around her. Silas stood beside them, eyes wet, jaw tight, saying nothing, saying everything. Then it happened. The moment that Rowan would remember for the rest of his life. A young man had been standing near the back of the crowd. Rowan had not noticed him at first. He was in his late 20s, thin, wearing a jacket too large for his frame. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his eyes moved constantly, scanning exits, scanning faces, scanning the tree line. The posture of a man who had spent time in places where stillness meant danger. He had come with the group from Missoula. He had stood at the edge of the gathering the entire time, separate from everyone, pulled tight into himself like a fist that had forgotten how to open. Then the fireworks started. Someone in town had arranged a small display, celebratory, joyful. The first burst cracked across the sky in a shower of gold and white. The young veteran dropped. Not gradually, not a stumble. He went down as if his strings had been cut. His knees hit the ground, and his hands went to his head, and his body curled forward into a position Rowan recognized instantly. The crash position. The position the body takes when it believes with every cell that it is about to be destroyed. People around him stepped back, confused, alarmed. Someone reached toward him, and he flinched violently. Gunner moved. The dog crossed 30 feet of lawn in seconds. Not running in panic, moving with the deliberate, measured pace of an animal executing a trained response to a crisis he had seen before. He reached the young man and did not bark, did not nudge, did not attempt to lick or paw. Gunner lay down, right beside the young veteran on the cold ground. He lowered his body until his chest was flat against the earth. He pressed his side against the man's curled form, and he breathed, slow, deep, in, out, in, out. The rhythm that was older than language, older than war, the rhythm that had brought Rowan back from Kandahar on a snow-covered highway, the rhythm that had kept him on the floor of a dark hallway instead of walking through a door he would never have come back from. The young man's hands found Gunner's fur. His fingers dug in. He held on. 1 minute. 2. The shaking slowed. The breathing steadied. The fist began to open. Rowan walked to them. He knelt, his left knee grinding against the cold ground, and he placed himself beside the young man without touching him. Close enough to be felt, far enough to not overwhelm. "His name is Gunner," Rowan said quietly. "He is my friend. He wants you to know that you are safe." The young man lifted his head. His eyes were red and wild and full of the particular terror that comes from being ambushed by your own memory. He looked at Gunner, at the steady rise and fall of the dog's rib cage, at the calm amber eyes that held no judgment and no fear. "He is warm," the young man whispered. His voice was hoarse, broken at the edges. He is, Rowan said, and he is not going anywhere. The young man pressed his face into Gunner's shoulder, and he stayed there while the fireworks faded and the crowd fell silent and the sky returned to its wide, clear blue. Later, when the man was sitting up and drinking coffee from a cup May had brought, Rowan saw a girl standing near the library entrance. She was 8 years old, the daughter of a female veteran who had come from Billings. The girl was pressing herself against the wall, her small hands covering her ears, her eyes squeezed shut. The last of the fireworks had reached her too. Rowan walked to her. He knelt slowly. Gunner followed and lay down beside the girl without being asked. "Hey," Rowan said. His voice was the softest it had been in years. "You want to try something with me? Breathe in." He inhaled. "Hold it." He waited. "Now let it go." The girl opened one eye, looked at Gunner. The dog's belly rose and fell in the same slow rhythm. "He is breathing with us," Rowan said. "See in, hold, out." The girl uncovered her ears. She breathed in, held it, let it go. And then she reached out and placed her hand on Gunner's side and felt the warmth and the steady heartbeat and the absolute, unshakable calm of an animal who had survived everything and chosen gentleness. She smiled, small, tentative, like a flower opening in a room where no one expected anything to grow. "He is so warm," she whispered. Rowan felt something in his chest crack open, not the sharp crack of breaking, the slow, deep crack of something thawing, ice giving way to water, stone giving way to root. He had spent his life learning how to survive, how to endure, how to absorb pain and keep moving. But this was different. This was not survival. This was the thing that comes after survival. The thing Vivian designed every room in this house to hold. Healing. That evening, after the crowds thinned and the volunteers began packing up, May found Rowan in the library. He was sitting in Vivian's reading chair, the one May had pointed out as Vivian's favorite, near the window that faced the western mountains. Gunner lay across his feet. May held something in her hand. A single page torn carefully from the back of Vivian's notebook. The last page. The one May had kept separate because she was not sure Rowan was ready to read it. She was ready now. She was sure. She handed it to Rowan without a word and sat in the chair beside him. The handwriting on this page was different from the rest of the notebook, steadier, more deliberate. As if Vivian had known this would be the most important thing she ever wrote and had summoned every ounce of control her failing body still possessed. "My dear Rowan, there is one final truth I must share with you. It concerns Gunner." Rowan's breath caught. He looked at the dog lying across his boots. Gunner's eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and content. The breathing of an animal at perfect rest. Many years ago, I funded a small program through the Veterans Affairs Department, a therapy initiative designed to pair returning soldiers with highly trained canines. Dogs bred not just for service, but for connection. For the ability to sense what a human being cannot say and respond to what a human being cannot ask for. Rowan's hand began to tremble. Gunner came from that program. I selected him personally from the first litter. I watched him grow. I followed his training. And when the time came for placement, I ensured that he would be assigned to your unit. Long before you knew he existed, long before you knew I existed, I chose him for you, and I chose you for him. The room went very still. Rowan read the words again, a third time, a fourth. Each time they landed differently. Each time they reached deeper into the architecture of his life and rearranged something fundamental. Every night, Gunner had lain beside him in the desert. Every morning, Gunner had nudged him awake when the nightmares came. Every hour of every day that the dog had spent pressed against Rowan's leg or blocking his path, or breathing slow to bring him back from the places where memory tried to drown him. None of it was accident. None of it was luck. None of it was the random kindness of a universe that occasionally gets things right. It was Vivian. It was always Vivian. Watching from the other side of a family that had thrown them both away, reaching across the distance with the only tools she had: money, planning, and a love so quiet and so patient that it took the shape of a dog and walked beside him through the worst years of his life without ever asking to be recognized. Rowan pressed his hand against his eyes. His shoulders shook once, twice. Then he breathed, the way Gunner had taught him. In, hold, out. He reached down and placed his hand on the dog's head. Gunner opened his eyes, looked up at Rowan. Those amber eyes that had seen sand and blood and darkness and had never once looked away. "She brought us together," Rowan whispered. "She knew what we would need before we did." Gunner lifted his head and pressed his forehead gently against Rowan's palm. A gesture so small and so deliberate that it said more than any word in any language ever spoken. May sat beside them, crying quietly, holding the handkerchief that still carried the faintest trace of her best friend's perfume. The three of them stayed in the library as the light faded and the mountains turned from gold to violet to the deep, infinite blue of a Montana evening. 2 days later, Garrett came to the sanctuary. He did not arrive in a black SUV. He drove a rental sedan alone. No Celeste, no lawyers, no leather folders. He parked at the bottom of the steps and sat in the car for a long time before getting out. When he finally climbed the steps, his posture was different, smaller. The broad shoulders that had filled courtrooms with intimidation were drawn in as if he were trying to take up less space in the world. He had accepted a plea agreement, 2 years of probation, community service, full restitution of legal fees, a formal acknowledgement of fraud in the manipulation of his aunt's will. He stood on the porch and looked at Rowan with eyes that held something Rowan had never seen in them before. Not defeat. Something deeper than defeat. The look of a man who has been forced to see himself clearly and does not like what he has found. He held a box. Small. Wooden. Old. "This belonged to your mother," he said. "I took it from her house before the will was read. I should not have." He held it out. Rowan took it, opened it. Inside was a photograph. Rowan as a child, maybe 5 years old, wearing a plastic army helmet 2 sizes too large, standing in the backyard with a toy rifle, and a grin that had not yet learned to be careful. And beneath the photograph, a card. His mother's handwriting. Shaky, uncertain, but legible. "My son is going to protect the world someday. I just hope the world is kind enough to protect him back." Rowan stared at the card. His jaw worked, but no sound came. Garrett spoke. His voice was rough. "She did not hate you. I wanted you to believe she did. I spent years making sure you thought she had forgotten you. But she talked about you. Every holiday, every time she saw a uniform on television. She would get quiet and go to her room, and I knew she was thinking about you." A long pause. "I was jealous. She was proud of you. She was never proud of me." Rowan looked up from the card. He held it against his chest the way May held Vivian's handkerchief, the way a person holds proof that they were loved when they had given up believing it. He could have said many things. He could have spoken of the years he spent believing his mother had erased him, of the nights he lay in barracks on the other side of the world wondering if anyone at home remembered his name, of the courtroom where Garrett's smirk had cut deeper than any shrapnel he had ever taken. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. Volunteer applications for the Timber Ridge Veteran Sanctuary. Groundskeeper and program assistant. Entry level. Honest work. I do not trust you, Rowan said. Garrett looked at the papers, but Vivian believed in second chances. Rowan paused. So do I. This is not forgiveness. This is an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Garrett took the papers with hands that trembled slightly. He nodded, did not speak, turned and walked back to his car. Gunner watched from the doorway. His tail did not wag, but his body was relaxed. His ears were forward. The posture of a dog who senses that a threat has passed and something new has taken its place. The evening came slowly that day. Rowan walked the trail behind the mansion with Gunner at his side. The path wound through the pines and up a gentle slope to a clearing where the whole valley opened below. The mountains stood in every direction, their peaks still holding the last of the winter snow, their slopes dark with evergreen. The sky turned from blue to amber to the deep layered rose of a sunset that seemed designed for this specific moment. Light poured across the valley and filled it with the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. The kind that comes from being in the right place at the right time with the right soul beside you. Gunner walked slightly ahead, his nose lifted, reading the wind the way he always did, cataloging every scent, every shift, every invisible story the air carried down from the peaks. Rowan's knee ached. It always ached. But tonight, the ache felt different. Not smaller. Just less alone. Shared somehow with the ground beneath his boots and the cold air in his lungs, and the dog walking ahead of him who carried his own scars beneath his dark coat and never complained about them. They reached the clearing. Rowan sat on a flat rock that had been warmed by the last of the sun. Gunner sat beside him. Below them, the mansion glowed with light from every window. Warm golden squares against the darkening mountainside. Through the open windows, faint sounds drifted up. Laughter, music, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen where May was probably already making tomorrow's bread. The sound of a house that was no longer empty. May appeared on the back porch, small against the frame of the door. She looked up the slope toward the clearing, shielding her eyes, and when she saw Rowan and Gunner silhouetted against the sunset, she waved once, slow, steady. Then she called out her voice, carrying clear and clean through the mountain air. Dogs know the way home. Rowan looked at Gunner. The dog looked back. His amber eyes caught the last light of the sun and held it. Home. Rowan had spent most of his life not knowing what the word meant. He had lived in barracks and bunkers and the back seats of trucks crossing deserts in the dark. He had lived in apartments he never decorated and rooms he never stayed in long enough to remember the color of the walls. But sitting here on this rock with this dog looking down at a house full of light and the sound of people he cared about doing ordinary things, Rowan understood. Home was not a place where the pain stopped. The pain did not stop. It would never stop completely. The knee would ache tomorrow. The nightmares would come again. The flashbacks would find their cracks and push through, and Gunner would be there each time, pressing close, breathing slow, pulling him back. Home was the place where the pain did not have to be carried alone. Rowan rested his hand on Gunner's back. The dog's fur was warm from the last of the sun. His heartbeat was slow and steady beneath Rowan's palm. "Thank you," Rowan whispered, "for everything, for all of it." Gunner leaned into him, solid, present, certain. They sat together as the stars came out one by one above the mountains. Then Gunner lifted his nose, sniffed the air. His ears rotated west toward the far ridge where Vivian's land stretched for hundreds of acres that no one had walked in years. Wild land, unexplored land, land that held its own stories and its own secrets and its own reasons for waiting. Gunner stood. His tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. His body was oriented toward the western ridge. His posture was not urgent, not alarmed. It was the posture of a dog who had caught a scent on the wind and found it interesting. Rowan looked at him, then at the ridge, then back at the dog. Again Gunner's tail wagged once more. His amber eyes were bright. Rowan shook his head. A smile crossed his face. Small, tired, real. The kind of smile that comes from a man who has learned that the end of one story is just the beginning of another. He stood. His knee cracked. He breathed through it. "All right, boy. Let us see what is out there." They walked down the slope together toward the house, toward the light, toward the people waiting inside. And beyond them, somewhere in the west, the wind carried a new scent across the mountains. A new mystery. A new reason to keep going. If you are carrying something heavy tonight, you do not have to put it down all at once. Just take one step. The right step. The next step. And if you are lucky, you will have someone walking beside you who already knows the way. Tell us in the comments, who is the loyal friend that helped you keep going? We would love to hear your story. And if this one meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it tonight. Subscribe so you do not miss what Gunner finds next. Because the road is not over. It never is. Not for the ones who keep walking.